Udi Goren is the cousin of murdered hostage Tal Chaimi. He's acted as head of the Knesset desk and the management team of the Hostage Family Forum. Udi, thank you again for joining us. I know we're exactly 2 years to the beginning of this awful war. Can you share a little bit about what the current mood is among the families of both victims of those who were killed and, of course, hostages who are still thought to be alive?
I think anxiety would describe it best. The anxiety and in a way also disbelief. But disbelief that we've gotten this far. I remember when we marked the 100-day anniversary, nobody believed that we would actually get there, and now it's the 2-year mark. And we've been here before. We've been here. We've been very close to a deal just in the past 6 months. There were twice that we were told, and I'm sure you've heard it as well, that we were told a deal was going to be signed tomorrow, or then it was the day after tomorrow, then it was next week, and then it collapsed. So there's a lot of anxiety, even though it looks or it feels different this time. And if to make the distinction between the families of the murdered hostages and the living hostages, I think there's this feeling of impending doom that all the families of the living hostages are carrying daily. As we speak, we know for fact that Romboslavski, that Evyatar David, they're being starved right now. You're in a conference room. There's food on the table. They're being starved. We know for fact that Guy Gilboa Dalal was moved to Gaza to become a human shield. We know this for fact because Hamas announced it and sent us a video of it. And we know other things as well. And that's on the one hand. And on the other hand, the families of the murdered hostages, they have the very, very serious fear that our loved ones would be lost forever because war is chaos. And even though there's some intelligence about where they are, they can be easily moved, they could be easily buried, they could easily be bombed, and when we might never find them again. So um, as the more that the war continues, and especially now when we might be on the verge of ending it, anxiety is very, very high.
Thank you so much, Udi. We had an expert tell us a little bit earlier that the fact that we haven't heard a lot come out of Cairo is actually indication of good news, because the less we know in the press, then the more likely things are actually happening behind the scenes. Do you or do the families have indication that this might be, in fact, the case, that things are happening? And is this in turn creating any optimism within the community?
I think that in essence it's true. We've seen this in the previous two deals. The fact that there were no leaks, then that actually meant that something was going on and advancing. But at the end of the day, this is a situation that has so many variables, and still everything can go wrong. Even things that aren't planned or aren't on purpose, but everything can go wrong. And anxiety is high. I would refer to the fact that what's different this time, very different this time, is that this is a deal proposed by President Trump, and he is being very, very pushy about it. He's very being even, I would say, not aggressive, but he's making it very, very clear as to where he wants this to go, which is a good thing. Because as soon as he took power, he said, I came here to end wars and make deals and bring peace." And this is one of the things that he's promised to do. He was able to create a very significant coalition behind this deal, backing up of all the Arab states and Turkey. We've seen just this morning the head of the Turkish intelligence going out to Egypt, that's a big thing. And in essence, isolating Hamas for the first time, being, having the entire world, including Israel, including the European countries, and that's a big thing. And thirdly, he's talking about the end of the war, not a partial deal, not some left behind, but the end of the war. And these two things go together. We've known this for a very long time. The last hostage will only be back at the end of the war. And without speaking about the end of the war, there would be no 48 hostages. So the fact that he has put his foot down and he's wrapping these two things together, that's a big thing. And as we've heard, the Prime Minister Netanyahu said he agrees to most of these terms. He has his own terms and so on. I mean, it's still complicated, but definitely it's a move in the right direction.
Okay, thank you for that. We're gonna go around the room and see if there are reporters who are physically here who have questions for Udi. Yes, you can't see her, but there's reporters.
Another design you had for Spanish outlets for a long time ago. I wonder when you hear and feel listening to experts who analyze in those terms as well, that it's obvious that the release of the hostages is the main goal, emotionally and passionately, but
I'm sorry, for some reason it was cut out. Talia, could you repeat the question? At some point I stopped hearing.
I say that on one hand, we all the time hear, of course, that the goal of releasing the hostages is the main one. But there are experts, not politicians, I mean analysts on strategic and security levels, who say that on the other hand, Israel should not neglect the attention to certain security needs in the framework of this agreement, because otherwise the danger will be even worse and bigger for the whole of the country, in the future. How do you feel about that? Do you feel that that implies that there is a certain situation in which Israel might say, well, we can't release them because otherwise this and that will happen later? How do you feel in that regard?
So I think that saying that Israel has to take care of its security needs is the obvious thing. I mean, we can't neglect our security in the long term. That's not even a question. However, what this deal does, and the reason that I think it's a very good proposal, is that it finally prioritizes these two objectives. As I think everybody in the world, or everybody that has a heart and a mind, can agree that we have to release all hostages and Israel has to be safe. These are two things that must happen. But unless we prioritize between them, we will not achieve neither of them. And the way this deal is built is that first and foremost, it brings out all the hostages and thus taking the knives off of Israel's throats. And the other thing that it talks about is the long-term goals of how to de-radicalize Gaza, of how to reconstruct Gaza above ground, not underground. Who's going to be responsible? Who's going to be responsible to make sure that there's no smuggling from the southern border? Who's going to be the patron of Hamas, not a terrorist supporting country, but one of the moderate countries? Who's going to be the alternative to Hamas? How are you going to rebuild a government in Gaza that actually acknowledges the Israeli state, to the right of the Israeli state to exist, and so on and so forth? I could answer this question for about half an hour. But the most important thing is that unless we prioritize, we will not achieve neither of the goals. And we have achieved so far about 80% of what we need in order to make sure that Hamas is not a significant player and does not pose a threat to Israel in the future. Not right now. Right now, Hamas is not an existential threat to Israel. And you don't need to ask me, you can ask the government of Israel that has brought back all the kibbutzim that live right by the border to go back living there. So they acknowledge that Hamas is no longer an existential threat to Israel. The Hamas military has been torn down. It is now a guerrilla organization, by the way, which is incredibly dangerous for an army like ours. Fighting guerrilla organizations anywhere in the world is the worst thing for an army. And after we have done this, after we have weakened Hamas militarily enough, now the time is to turn to other ways of fighting it, mainly financially, drying it out financially, making sure that there's no suitcases of money going in, that the patron is everything I've said before. But the financial war is the most important thing, ending the smuggling into Gaza of weapons, ending the uncontrolled delivery of goods that Israel used to be a part of, supplying 3,000 to 6,000 trucks of supplies every month that we didn't know if they were used for terrorism or if they were used for construction. And again, it's a very, very long list. But the main thing is de-radicalization, is changing the education system in Gaza, and it's an alternative to Hamas, having a different government, and the Trump plan addresses it. And you don't need to ask me this question. Actually, you can listen to our chief of staff, the head of the Israeli military, the current one, the previous one, and the previous Minister of Defense, Gallant, say the same thing. After we have weakened Hamas enough, now it's time to use our diplomatic arm and use that in order to further fight Hamas so it's no longer a threat to Israel.
Udi, thank you very much.